my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker. As many of you know, Tom was many years a Catholic priest. He was also co-pastor of this church. He uses humor in his talks, but he always manages to inject a very important point. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Tom Baker.
David, you look like a cross between a cardinal and a bartender. I feel right at home. Well, today we celebrate the fellowship family reunion, and it's a family reunion. We're often born into karmic families, which are kind of, I think, chosen for us. People often wonder in their families, how did I get here? And, I chose this. You've got to be kidding. But I think our guides put a little pressure on us. And they say, okay, you're going to learn a lot from this person. And then when we get over again, we found out what we learned. But it's often rather mystical. I chose my own father, I think, with a little pressure from my guides and from his guides, so that I would be proactive about religion. My father is an atheist, so my kind of personality is kind of oppositional defiant. You say yes, I say no, that kind of thing. He says atheist, I say priest. How it works. So I thought that I would become a priest and then I would convert my father to Catholicism, which I did. But when I left the priesthood, he reneged on his Catholicism. But he kind of gave me a backhand compliment. He said, without you in the priesthood, I would have had to take communion from a dull guy in colorful clothes and bad breath. And you added a light touch, he said, a bit of humor, and you gargle, which... That was nice. That was criticism. My father could be critical and nice at the same time. He had that kind of funny way about him. So there were a lot of mixed messages from my dad. And so as Jesus chose his disciples, not that I'm like Jesus, but as Jesus did that, he did it, so I could do it. I've always chosen my fathers and my mothers and brothers and sisters. And considering the reaction that you all have with each other, which is a lovely reaction, I felt I was in heaven this morning. That you've chosen, many of you have chosen each other to be father and mother and brother and sister. And that's a marvelous thing. That's like a universal family thing. When I told my mother that I was leaving the priesthood and was going to co-pastor a New Age church called the Fellowship of the Inner Light, my mother replied, promise me one thing, Tom, do not become a kook. And I smiled and I said, Mother, I'm already a kook. And I'm going to where I feel at home. So my mother always thought of this as Cooksville, USA. So I came to the fellowship and I co-pastored the church with Grace David. And someone asked me at that time whether I was leading edge, cutting edge, bleeding edge, or off the edge. And as I looked at my fellow alternative religion folks, I said, well, I'm off the edge. compared to where I came from. Going from the Catholic Church to the fellowship was like going from Middle America to a combination of Woodstock and India. It was very different, but it was genuine. It was genuine. See, that's the key. I traded a dressed-up religion for a dressed-down faith expression. I came here in 1990. Shoes were optional. Money was scarce. I got paid $130 a week if the collection was good. But everyone was friendly and everyone was genuine. And I got readings about everything. I've never had so very many readings in my life. My past lives, my liver. I had a reading about my hair. It didn't work. My mind, which I thought I was losing. And my love life. I was bid for and won by my future wife, Kathy, right in this room. That's when Grace, I think Grace got bid like $500 or something, and I got my wife's last dime, so $130. That was my week's salary. But we had the most enchanted life. We've had the most enchanted life, but we had the most enchanted evening of our lives. And it was that dinner that I knew we were going to get married. See, that's what the fellowship does. See, the fellowship, when you look at it one way, it's kooky. When you look at it another way, it's extraordinary. It has that interesting kind of sense to it. So, you who have come from the Catholic Church, the recovering Catholic new person back there, yeah. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, yeah, woo, 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 yeah. It's gonna stay with it. Stay with it. But there are two things about the fellowship that I really love. One is that you are real people. You are real folks. This is the second most inclusive church I've ever known. You say, uh-oh, there's another one. The competition in you starts to rise. The Catholic Church is the most inclusive church that I've ever known. The Catholic Church considers everybody in the world Catholic. They just don't know it. Thank you. That's exactly right. You all are really Catholics. And when you don't go to heaven, you will realize you haven't been good Catholics. Or so the Catholic Church thinks. It's inclusion by fiat. They've decided that you're included. But that's not your decision, is it? No, of course not. The fellowship has you be included because God has you be included. And what is good for God is good for the fellowship. I've sort of noticed that. And anything that, any expression of faith is also encouraged here. That was really new to me. Coming from a Catholic thing where every expression of faith was kind of an invitation for heresy. Any expression of faith here is just welcomed and loved, and there are pictures of Jesus and angels and all those other religions over there, and the Catholic part of me is, But the Tom part of me is, The other thing about this church is that there's an extraordinary amount of synchronicity. Things happen in agreement with each other. The song will speak to the reading, which is touched on in the sermon, and then something happens that speaks to everything. It's amazing. I have never planned things with the musicians and the speakers and the introducers and everything, but something often happens. It's amazing. One Sunday, you may have been here, I was giving a talk about what kind of car would Jesus drive? Not my best effort. But it was summer, and it was relaxed, and so I was saying, what kind? I asked the congregation, I said, what kind of car did Jesus drive? And I was thinking, Chrysler or something. You may have Chrysler. And at that moment, when I asked the question, not even giving that answer, those doors opened. And a man came in, and he said, "Who is driving the blue Pontiac with Maryland license plates?" And the whole congregation said, "Jesus." The expression on that man's face.
And was it?
I don't know. He went out, he never came back. Sometimes, Jesus just left his lights on. He's not, he's the Son of God, he's not perfect. On a bit more somber note, my mother passed over about a year and a half ago, and I've often thought that she has looked down on the fellowship from Spirit, and she sees a place here a lot like the place where she is, a place of Spirit, a place of love. And I've often thought, in Unity Church, they have this prayer, not prayer for protection, but it's a prayer that the Christ in you greets the Christ in me. We work together to realize the glory of God, I think. And I have thought that my mother has discovered her inner kook, her inner divine kook. And then I thought of this greeting, and I don't think you should use it here, actually, but it would be fun to do one Sunday, to say, the inner kook in me greets the inner kook in you, and together we are kooky for God. It would be sweet. One of my favorite things about past life regressions, I do these past life regressions, which, makes me real kooky, but very happy, is when people return to their soul groups. It's almost always a passionate, tear-filled reunion. Feels like falling in love. And falling in love is when you recognize the divine in somebody else. And people cry and they smile, they're out of breath, it's amazing. And I had a past life regression myself. And I was regressed back to a lifetime in which I was a bishop in a Spanish town. And I asked that I be regressed back to my favorite life. And I was a bishop, and the people in the town would carry me around in a sedan chair. You know those chairs that they and they carried me around, and I would give them the old Episcopal papal blessing. And I'd be floating just above their heads, you know, in that sedan chair. Oh man! Oh, you want to go back with me? It was wonderful. But I have many times in the fellowship felt that same thing, a kind of uplift, like I was floating on top of everybody. You know, kind of the mosh pit of divine love. It's like I recognize those people lifting me up, carrying me around, celebrating our relationship. And I needed this a whole lot after I left the priesthood. I didn't tell anybody about how awful I felt, but I just felt like a nobody. And when you lifted me up with your friendliness and your kindness, I was worthwhile again. That was a moment. I could still be some type of priest, but without vows, without liturgical clothing, and without loneliness, and especially no longer shivering in the cold shadow of the cross and its doctrine of suffering. Coming here felt like going home to my soul group, or a group that was determined to help me and be my family until I could build one of my own. It seems to me like the fellowship is one of those rare places on earth where no one ever need be a stranger. It's a lot like, I think, being with Jesus. You know, Jesus was different than the Old Testament prophets. The Old Testament prophets always spoke to the nation of Israel. Hear, O Israel, the prophets said. They did not speak to people. Jesus spoke to people. He spoke their names: James, John, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, Salome. And he speaks to people here: Bruce, Grace, Angela, Sarah, Susan, Chris. The fellowship is where you have a name and a birthday, and they're both celebrated. Where you have an ego personality and a divine personality, and they're both accepted. And where you can sing beautifully, or sing not too well, or sing not at all, and Bruce plays on. And that's too. The fellowship has a feel of a soul group, but one that everybody can join and return to, knowing they'll be welcomed and celebrated and accepted. It's a kind of generic soul group, or a soul group for folks who have temporarily lost their soul group. In the Catholic Church, we used to call those folks lost souls. In the fellowship, they're called friends. And that is great. That is very great. Now, I did psychic research with Mary Roach several years ago on the levels of consciousness. When I asked her what the highest level of consciousness was, she said it was the 21st level. After the 21st level of consciousness, she was in a group consciousness that grew larger with each level after that. When I asked her how many levels of consciousness there were, she replied, about 350. The first 21 levels were the consciousness of individualism. After that, we don't need a body anymore, and we ascend into greater and greater oneness with the universe. Now, this little fellowship is where each person holds out one hand to the other, as if to say, I love you for who you are. in the greater fellowship of the universe, we join hands and say, I love you for who we are. At that moment, the fellowship will be as large and as great as Paul Solomon dreamed that it could be. And we're close. We're real close. Thank you so much.